royal love written in whispers and sealed with a death.
My queen, England is yours.
In the courts of kings and queens, love was never just love. It was a weapon, a secret, and a crime's most dangerous weakness. In the heart of Tudor England, where betrayal was currency and silence was survival, one man rose from disgrace to stand at the side of a queen. His name was Robert Dudley, a man whose charm was as lethal as his ambition, and whose heart would become a battlefield between love and power. A family marked by ambition. Robert Dudley was born in 1532, the fifth son of John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, one of the most powerful men to ever walk through the halls of Whitehall Palace. The Dudleys were not of ancient royal blood, but they were clever, bold, and hungry for greatness. John Dudley had served under King Henry VIII, surviving the chaos of his 6 marriages and the downfall of countless noble houses. When Henry's sickly son, Edward VI, took the throne, John saw an opportunity to rule England through the boy king. Power had become his religion. Robert grew up in this world, a glittering yet dangerous court where words could crown or destroy a man overnight. He learned early how to bow, when to flatter, and, most importantly, when to stay silent. But even as he trained to survive the politics of kings, Robert carried a restless fire, a charm and boldness that would later catch the eye of England's most enigmatic queen. The fall of the Dudleys. When young King Edward VI fell gravely ill, John Dudley's ambition reached its peak. To keep the Protestant faith alive, and his own grip on power, he arranged a marriage between his son Guilford Dudley and Lady Jane Grey, the king's cousin. Upon Edward's death, John seized the throne for Jane, the 9 days queen. But England rejected them. The people rose in favor of Mary Tudor, daughter of Henry VIII, and the rightful heir. John Dudley's gamble had failed. The Dudley name, once golden in court, now became synonymous with treason. John was executed. Guilford and Lady Jane were executed. And Robert, along with his brothers, was thrown into the Tower of London, the same grim fortress where he would later meet destiny itself. Visual cut. A slow pan of the tower's cold stone corridors. The sound of chains and distant footsteps echo faintly. They say the tower remembers every tear that falls within its walls. Robert spent months in that prison, his youth swallowed by damp stone and the silence of despair. But fate, in its strange cruelty, gave him a companion there, a young woman who had also lost everything. Her name was Elizabeth Tudor. The Tower's 2 prisoners. Elizabeth had been accused of treason, suspected of plotting rebellion against her half-sister, Queen Mary. In those days of fear, she trusted no one, until she met the fallen Dudley. They shared the same air of tragedy. He, the son of a traitor. She, the daughter of a disgraced queen and a man many called a tyrant. What passed between them in those quiet days, no record tells. But later, Elizabeth would say, "I do not forget my friends in misfortune." And perhaps that was true. For when she finally ascended the throne in 1558, she remembered Robert and summoned him back into her life. The Queen ascends. Scene opens. Trumpets. The coronation of Elizabeth I. The narrator continues over candlelit imagery of Westminster Abbey. On a cold January morning, the bells of London rang for a new queen. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, took her crown, a woman stepping into a world ruled by men. Every ambassador, every noble, every soldier watched her, wondering, would she marry? Would she rule alone? And who would hold her favor? That answer came swiftly. At her coronation, Robert Dudley stood by her side. She named him Master of the Horse, one of the most coveted positions in court, giving him the privilege to be near her at all times. He managed her stables, her travel, her ceremonies, and her private moments. He was seen at dawn beside her horses, and at dusk by her throne. Their laughter, their glances, it became impossible not to notice. Whispers in the court. The Queen looks at him too often, one lady murmured. She smiles when he speaks, another whispered. Foreign ambassadors sent secret letters home. The Queen is said to visit Lord Robert in his chambers day and night. There is much talk. And indeed, there was. For though Elizabeth was unmarried, Robert was not. He had a wife, Amy Robsart, a woman of gentle heart, living quietly far from the court, in the countryside. Her absence only fueled the rumors. People began to say what no one dared speak aloud. If only she were gone, the Queen might take him for herself. The Queen's confidant. Despite the whispers, Elizabeth refused to distance herself. She trusted Robert more than any man in her court. He was not merely handsome or charming, he was a reflection of her own fire. He understood her temper, her fears, her loneliness. At banquets, when others toasted her beauty, he toasted her courage. In moments of despair, he spoke not to the crown, but to the woman who wore it. It was said that when Elizabeth laughed with him, the weight of her crown seemed lighter. Yet love, in a palace, was never a private affair. Her advisers grew restless. William Cecil, her most loyal minister, warned her, "Your Majesty, England will not forgive a queen who gives her heart before her hand." But Elizabeth, defiant as ever, kept Dudley close. The mirror of the Queen's soul. The bond between them was undeniable. In portraits painted of those years, Elizabeth's eyes hold a distant sadness, a loneliness framed in gold. And behind her, often in shadow, stands Robert Dudley, watching her, loyal, silent, eternal. He was her confidant, her laughter in the dark, the one who saw Elizabeth not as a symbol, but as a soul. Yet, that closeness became his curse. For every smile she gave him, another enemy sharpened their knives. Every whisper of affection became a question of loyalty. The courtiers began to call him the Queen's favourite. But favourites in Tudor England seldom ended well. A letter from Cumnor Place. Far from London, Amy Robsart lived a life of isolation at Cumnor Place, a manor in Oxfordshire. Her letters, what little survive, speak of illness and loneliness. She rarely saw her husband, who now basked in royal favour. Neighbours would later recall her sadness, her restlessness. Some claimed she had grown paranoid, convinced that her death would come before her time. no one could know how right she was. A fall that changed everything. On September 8, 1560, while the Queen was travelling through the English countryside, a message arrived. Amy Robsart was dead. Found at the foot of a staircase, her neck broken. The servants swore it was an accident, that she had fallen. But England did not believe them. Whispers exploded through London. The Queen's lover has killed his wife. Elizabeth locked herself in her chambers for days. She refused to see anyone, not even Robert. He, in turn, rode to Cumnor in shock. The witnesses described him as pale, trembling, grief-stricken. But grief, in politics, is a dangerous emotion. Every tear he shed was seen as performance. Every silence as guilt. A death, a scandal, a curse. The investigation concluded that Amy's death was likely an accident, but the verdict did nothing to silence the storm. Elizabeth's advisors begged her to cast Robert from court. Instead, she protected him, insisting he was innocent. But the damage was done. The dream that once shimmered in the golden halls of a queen and her beloved standing side by side as king and queen vanished forever. Even if Elizabeth had loved him, she could never marry him now. Not after this. To take Dudley as her husband would mean confirming every whisper, every accusation. It would mean admitting the crown itself had blood on its hands. The shadow over love. And so, Robert remained, near, yet forever distant. The man she trusted more than anyone, yet the one she could never claim. They continued to share their secret glances, their unspoken history, but between them now stood a ghost. Amy Robsart's fall became the dividing line between love and legend. History remembers kings and queens for the wars they fought. But sometimes, the greatest battles were waged within their own hearts. Robert Dudley had risen from the ashes of his family's disgrace to stand beside England's most powerful monarch. But in doing so, he had stepped into a shadow he could never escape. The Tower had once imprisoned his body. Now, the crown imprisoned his soul. The world saw him as the Queen's favorite. But perhaps he was something else. The man who loved the Queen too much to ever be free. After the death of Amy Robsart, England became a kingdom of whispers. Every corridor in the royal palaces, every tavern in London, carried the same question. Did the Queen's favourite kill his wife? No one dared to speak it aloud in Elizabeth's presence, yet she could feel the weight of it in every gaze, in every breath of silence that followed her name. Robert Dudley's face, once the symbol of charm and triumph, had become a reminder of everything scandalous in her reign. But instead of banishing him, Elizabeth kept him closer than ever. It was not love alone that bound them, it was trust. And trust, in the Tudor court, was rarer than loyalty. The scandal that would not die. Months passed. The official inquest declared Amy's death a tragic accident. The verdict convinced no one. Foreign ambassadors, particularly those from Spain and France, filled their letters with venom. They warned their monarchs that the English Queen might soon marry the man suspected of murdering his wife. The Spanish ambassador wrote bitterly to King Philip II. The Queen shows more affection for Lord Robert than for the safety of her own throne. In Europe's royal courts, Elizabeth's image began to fracture. The woman who had been celebrated as the wise Virgin Queen was now whispered about as a reckless lover. Her council urged her to make a public choice, to distance herself from Dudley or risk the respect of her kingdom. But Elizabeth was not a woman easily commanded. A queen and her shadow. Robert Dudley continued to appear at her side, during court festivities, during hunts, during the grand progresses across England. He rode beside her carriage, he walked beside her throne. Every time she smiled at him, poets scribbled sonnets. Every time she lingered in conversation, ambassadors wrote reports. And yet, in private, their relationship was a labyrinth. Elizabeth, for all her affection, kept Dudley at a distance no man could cross. She knew her crown depended on it. He, for all his devotion, lived in torment, close enough to touch her hand, yet forever denied her heart. Those who saw them together described a strange duality, a queen who ruled a kingdom with steel, and a man who ruled her heart in silence. Cecil's warning. Among the Queen's most loyal advisers, Sir William Cecil watched the unfolding story with cold anxiety. He was a man of reason, loyal not to passion but to England itself. He had served Elizabeth since her youth and knew her nature better than anyone, impulsive, proud, and fiercely independent. To him, Robert Dudley was a danger not only to her reputation but to the very stability of the crown. In private, Cecil once told her, "Your Majesty, if you will not love England more than this man, England may cease to love you." Elizabeth's eyes, it is said, turned to fire. "You presume too much, my lord," she replied. "I am married to England, and to England alone." It was one of the greatest truths she ever spoke, and one of the greatest lies she ever lived. The offer of a crown. Despite the scandal, Dudley's influence only grew. He had become indispensable, the man who knew how to manage her moods, how to charm ambassadors, how to keep her court under control. But his ambition did not rest. When the idea of marriage for the Queen was discussed, Robert's name was always at the edge of it. The English people, despite their gossip, admired him. He was handsome, capable, and brave, and to many, the thought of him as king consort did not seem impossible. At one point, even foreign powers began to consider it seriously. The Spanish ambassador, perhaps out of frustration, wrote, "If the Queen must have a husband, let it be Lord Robert. At least then we know who rules her heart." But within the English court, such talk was poison. The nobility feared that if Elizabeth married him, Dudley's ambition would eclipse them all. Even Cecil began to plot quietly against him, ensuring that Elizabeth would never risk her crown for love. A dangerous proposal. In 1563, a strange event occurred, one that revealed how much Elizabeth was willing to test the boundaries of her affection. She proposed, indirectly, that Dudley might marry Mary, Queen of Scots, her Catholic rival and cousin. The offer shocked everyone. To Dudley, it was an unthinkable betrayal. To the court, it was proof of Elizabeth's cunning. If Mary married Robert, Elizabeth would keep both her rival and her favourite under her control. But the plan was doomed from the start. Mary refused to marry a man whose name was stained by scandal. And Robert, heartbroken, saw the truth. The Queen would never marry him, and yet she would never let him go, the Queen's possession. Elizabeth ruled England with unmatched intelligence, but she ruled Robert Dudley with something far more dangerous: jealous affection. He could not belong to another woman. Whenever rumors arose that he might be courting someone else, Elizabeth reacted with fury. She scolded him in front of courtiers, denied him privileges, and then restored them days later. To the world, it seemed he was her servant. To those who truly understood, he was her prisoner. A prisoner of the Queen's favor. A man who lived under the shadow of her love, protected by it, and destroyed by it in equal measure. The return of hope. In the mid-1560s, Dudley began to rebuild his image. He threw himself into public service, organizing royal progresses, overseeing tournaments, and gaining the respect of England's people once again. His loyalty during political crises, especially during rebellion in the north, reminded everyone of his courage and capability. Elizabeth rewarded him by granting him a title, Earl of Leicester. It was a gesture both of affection and of control, a crown's way of saying, "I will give you everything but myself." When the Queen placed the ribbon upon his shoulder, she smiled before the court and said, "My sweet Robin, you are now what you have always been, noble in my sight." The courtiers applauded. But those who saw their faces knew the title was both a gift and a chain. The love that lingered. Years passed. Elizabeth remained unmarried. Robert remained by her side. No woman ever came close to replacing him in her affections, but she could not risk making him her equal. To Elizabeth, marriage meant surrender, and she had vowed never to kneel before any man, even the one she loved. To Robert, her love was a blessing he could never hold. He was permitted to stand beside her throne, but never on it the Queen's burden. Behind closed doors, Elizabeth's emotions were far from the cold mask she wore in public. Sometimes, when she dismissed her court late at night, she would speak to him alone, not as queen and subject, but as two people who had once shared the same darkness in the tower. "We are both prisoners of this crown," she once said quietly. "You of your name, and I of mine." And perhaps in that moment, they understood each other completely. But the world outside those walls did not. To her people, she was the Virgin Queen. To him, she was everything he could never possess. The unseen battle. Through the 1560s, as England grew stronger, Elizabeth's reign stabilized. But her private life remained England's greatest mystery. Ambassadors still speculated about their relationship. Poets still hinted at it in verse. And though Elizabeth denied all claims of intimacy, her actions betrayed her. She trusted no one with state secrets except Cecil and Robert. When she was ill, only Robert was allowed to see her. When she celebrated victory, only he was near her. He was the mirror of her reign, loyal, flawed, and burdened by secrets. The man behind the myth. Robert Dudley had risen from disgrace to become the Queen's most powerful companion. But the cost was immense. He was loved by a woman who could never be his. He was hated by a court that envied his place. and he was haunted by the death of a wife whose ghost followed him in every glance. To the world, he was the Queen's favourite. To Elizabeth, he was a memory of everything she could not allow herself to feel. The Queen's favourite. The years would pass, but their story was far from over. Dudley's loyalty would soon be tested in ways he never imagined, through war, betrayal, and the rise of new rivals for Elizabeth's affection. The Queen might rule an empire, but in her heart, she ruled only one man. And that man's destiny was about to collide with history itself. History often hides its sharpest truths behind polite words. Officially, Amy Robsart's death was an accident. Unofficially, it became the most whispered crime in Tudor England. Years had passed since that September morning of 1560, yet the air around it never cleared. Every time the Queen smiled at Robert Dudley, the ghost of Amy returned to the room. A woman forgotten. Amy Robsart had once been a name of innocence, the daughter of a Norfolk gentleman, known for her quiet grace and tender spirit. When she married Robert at 17, theirs had been a union of love, not politics. Even King Edward VI had attended the wedding, blessing the young couple. But love in Tudor England was a fragile thing. As Robert's fortunes rose and he became the Queen's companion, Amy faded into absence, far from court, hidden in country manners, her husband's letters brief and cold. Servants later recalled her as lonely but proud, refusing pity. "I am my lord's true wife," as she said once, "although I see him not, nor he me." Those words would become a haunting echo. Cumnor Place. Cumnor Place was a quiet house near Oxford, surrounded by orchards and silence. There, Amy lived with a small household, loyal servants, a few companions, and the weight of rumours that travelled faster than letters. She knew what people whispered in London. She knew that her husband was the Queen's constant shadow. And she feared that, sooner or later, her existence would be an inconvenience to powerful people. One servant remembered her pacing the hall on the eve of her death, restless and anxious. She ordered that every servant attend the fair in the nearby village that Sunday, insisting she wished to be alone. When they returned that evening, they found her lifeless at the foot of a staircase, her neck broken, her head wounded. The letter that changed everything. The messenger who rode to London carried more than a report of tragedy. He carried a storm. Robert Dudley, hearing the news, is said to have turned pale as marble. He locked himself away for days, refusing food, refusing visitors. But grief, when displayed by a man surrounded by suspicion, looked too much like guilt. The Queen's reaction was worse. Elizabeth shut herself in her private chamber for nearly a week, refusing council business, refusing to appear in public. To her ministers, that silence spoke volumes. To the world, it looked like mourning for a secret husband. The investigation. The coroner's jury was summoned to Cumnor Place. 18 men examined the body, the stairs, the blood on the floor. Their verdict, signed and sealed, a misfortune by falling down a pair of stairs. It should have ended there. But it didn't. The staircase was short, Amy's wounds too severe. Witnesses whispered that the doors had been locked from the outside. Others swore she had spoken of danger days before. Even centuries later, historians would not agree. Some argued she suffered from breast cancer, her bones weakened and fell. Others saw darker hands at work, political, not personal, the web of motives. Who would have wanted Amy Robsart dead? Her husband? If Robert wished to marry the Queen, her death cleared the path. Yet no marriage followed. The Queen's enemies? If they could ruin her reputation, they could weaken her throne. Or fate itself, cruelly timed, striking down an innocent and leaving two powerful souls branded forever. Whatever the truth, one fact was undeniable. Amy's death destroyed any chance Elizabeth and Dudley might have had for happiness. The aftermath. The scandal shook England. The Spanish ambassador reported, "The Queen cannot marry Lord Robert now. The people would not suffer it." Elizabeth knew it. Robert knew it. For all their affection, one broken neck had broken their future. Robert withdrew for a time from court, living in quiet disgrace, though Elizabeth continued to write to him. Her letters were cautious, half regal, half tender. "I trust God has given you comfort," as she wrote, "for I have none." To her council, she swore that she would never marry a man whose wife had died so suspiciously. To her heart, she whispered something very different. The Queen's image. Elizabeth's advisors worked tirelessly to repair the damage. Foreign ambassadors were reassured that the Queen would consider royal matches with princes of Sweden, of Austria, of France. Each proposal followed the same pattern: hope, hesitation, refusal. Because no matter what promises she made, her heart remained tied to one man. Yet she understood now that marrying him would destroy her crown. The Virgin Queen was born out of necessity, not design. Chastity became her armor, independence her legend. Behind that legend stood the shadow of Amy Robsart, the woman whose death had made the Queen a symbol. The Queen and the Earl. Robert returned to court cautiously. Elizabeth received him with the same smile as before, as if nothing had happened. But there was a difference now, a quiet barrier neither dared to cross. He had become indispensable again, attending councils, organizing tournaments, advising her in private. But even as she rewarded him with titles and lands, she reminded him of his place. "I cannot live without you," as she once told him, "but I dare not live with you." Those words defined their lives: public forgiveness, private guilt. Years later, when the first biographies of Elizabeth were written, her defenders claimed she had been innocent, that she had grieved deeply for Amy. Others accused her of deliberate cruelty, keeping Dudley close to remind herself that she was above mortal feelings. The truth lay somewhere in between. Elizabeth was a ruler first, a woman second. Robert was a man torn between ambition and love. Theirs was not a romance of passion, but of endurance, a love that refused to die even when buried beneath scandal. The Queen's progress. Every summer, Elizabeth undertook grand progresses across her kingdom. The people adored her, the golden-haired Virgin Queen, untouched by scandal, radiant in her jeweled gowns. But in every castle she visited, Robert was there, ever present, ever loyal. Some said they saw her look at him with eyes full of regret. Others said he had aged, his laughter quieter, his confidence worn thin. The courtiers played their parts, pretending not to notice the history between them, pretending not to see the ghost that followed them both. The legend grows. As years passed, the story of Amy Robsart transformed from tragedy into myth. Poets called her the Lady of the Stairs. Chroniclers whispered that her spirit haunted Cumnor Place, waiting for justice. Playwrights turned her into a symbol, the innocent victim of courtly ambition. For Elizabeth, it was an open wound she could never close. For Robert, it was the price of being loved by a queen. The irony of power. Amy's death had been meant to set him free, or so some believed. Instead, it chained him forever to the one woman he could never marry. Every success he earned afterward, every honor, every victory, carried that shadow. When foreign princes visited the English court, they looked at Dudley not as a statesman, but as a reminder of England's scandal. He bore it silently. Perhaps because silence was the only penance left to him. A quiet confession. Years later, during a private conversation recorded by one of her ladies, Elizabeth spoke of Amy's death only once. "I loved my Robin too well," as she said softly, "but I lost him the day his wife died." No one dared ask her what she meant. Maybe she meant that the world had taken him from her. Maybe she meant that guilt had replaced love. Or maybe she meant that fate itself had judged them both. Legacy of a fall. Cumnor Place no longer stands. Its stones were torn down centuries ago, its grounds swallowed by fields and time. But the story of that fall remains one of Tudor England's enduring mysteries. To this day, historians argue, was Amy Robsart murdered, or did she simply fall? Did Robert Dudley's ambition outstrip his heart, or was he the victim of other schemes? No one will ever know. But her death shaped the course of England. It gave birth to the legend of a virgin queen and imprisoned a man within his own reputation. The turning of the years. By the late 1560s, Dudley had regained Elizabeth's favour, though never her hand. She trusted him with her armies, with her secrets, with her life, but not with her throne. To the world, he was the most powerful commoner in England. To her, he was still Robin. And to history, he was the man forever followed by the sound of unseen footsteps on a staircase in Cumnor Place. Time, in the Tudor court, moved like candlelight, trembling, beautiful, and doomed to fade. By the 1570s, the golden age of Elizabeth's reign had truly begun. England was powerful, cultured, and feared across Europe. But for all her triumphs, one story remained unfinished, the story of the man who had stood beside her through every victory and every shadow, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. The return of favour. Years after Amy Robsart's death, Elizabeth slowly restored Robert to full favour. He became master of the horse again, a position that kept him close to her, managing her processions, her ceremonies, her very movements. Whenever the Queen appeared in public, he was near, riding beside her, holding her stirrup, his gaze never leaving her. Foreign ambassadors took note. One wrote to his king, "The Queen loves him beyond reason. He may do with her what he pleases." But that power was an illusion. Robert knew it. Elizabeth knew it, for every glance, every private word was watched by 100 eyes. They had learned that love, for rulers, was the most dangerous form of weakness. Still, the bond between them endured, a connection built on decades of shared secrets, laughter, and unspoken grief. To many at court, they were like twin stars, distant, untouchable, and forever circling one another. A queen's dilemma. Elizabeth was now in her 40s, still radiant, still commanding. But time was pressing, and her council reminded her of the one thing she had refused to do: marry. They urged her toward alliances: Archduke Charles of Austria, Francis of Anjou of France, even the young King of Sweden. Each proposal was greeted with the same smile, the same vague promises, and finally, the same quiet refusal. The truth was known only to her inner circle. No man could take the place of Robert Dudley. No foreign prince could compete with decades of loyalty. And yet, the Queen's heart and the crown could never coexist. To marry Dudley was to risk rebellion. The nobles would never forget Amy Robsart, nor forgive their queen for marrying the man linked to her death. So she wore her loneliness like a crown, and her crown like armor. The marriage that broke his heart. In 1578, a single act shattered what peace they had. Robert Dudley secretly married Lettice Knollys, the Queen's cousin, a woman known for her wit and beauty. When Elizabeth discovered it, the fury that followed shook the court. In her private chamber, she called Lettice the she-wolf, and forbade her ever to appear before her again. To Robert, she said only, "You shall have no more peace while you live." For months afterward, she refused to speak to him. He was banished from court, his name whispered in mockery. And yet, she could not forget him even in anger. Elizabeth's affection for him lingered like a wound that refused to heal. When plague struck London that year, she sent a messenger to ensure he was safe. Her ministers noticed. Her heart still betrayed her crown. The shadow of war. As years passed, England's enemies grew bolder. In 1585, Spain threatened invasion, and Elizabeth needed men she could trust. Despite everything, she turned again to Robert Dudley. She appointed him commander of the English forces in the Netherlands, sending him to aid the Dutch rebels against Spain. It was the first and only time she allowed him to wield an army in her name. When he left, she gave him a jeweled ring, a silent symbol of forgiveness. He bowed deeply before her, saying, "My life is yours, and will end as it began, in your service." Those words would prove truer than he knew. The Campaign of Shadows. In the Netherlands, Dudley found both glory and humiliation. He was named Governor-General, a title that made him appear almost like a king. When news reached Elizabeth, she was furious. She accused him of overreaching, of trying to claim power beyond his station. Letters flew between London and the Dutch ports, each one colder than the last. She signed one with bitter irony, "From your sovereign, who yet wishes you well." But in truth, she worried for him more than she admitted. Each night, her ladies saw her pacing, holding his letters, reading them by candlelight, the final return. By 1588, Robert had returned to England, weary but loyal. The Spanish Armada was gathering, the greatest threat Elizabeth's reign had ever faced. And once again, she called upon him. He organized the troops at Tilbury, ensuring every man was ready to defend England. When Elizabeth arrived in her armor to deliver her famous speech, "I have the heart and stomach of a king," it was Robert who stood at her side, unseen but vital, commanding the army's heart while she commanded its spirit. The victory that followed made them legends. But for Robert Dudley, it was his last triumph. The last letter. Only weeks after the Armada's defeat, Robert fell ill while travelling to Buxton. Some said it was a fever, others whispered of exhaustion, or perhaps a heart broken by years of unspoken love. He wrote to Elizabeth one final time from his bed in Oxfordshire. It was a simple, tender letter, a farewell in all but name. "I humbly kiss your Majesty's hands, wishing your health and happiness beyond my own. Your most faithful and obedient servant, R. Leicester." Elizabeth received it on September 4, 1588. 3 days later, word came that he was dead. When she heard, she locked herself in her chamber and refused to see anyone. For days, she wept in silence. Her servants said they had never seen her so undone. She kept that final letter in a small box by her bed until her own death 15 years later. She marked it simply, his last letter. The Queen without a crown of love. After Robert's death, Elizabeth changed. She became quieter, colder, as if a light had gone out inside her. She filled her court with new favourites, younger men like the Earl of Essex, but none ever reached her heart. When courtiers spoke of love, she would smile and say, "I am married to England." But those who had known her longest saw the truth. Her eyes often drifted to the empty space beside her throne, where Robert had once stood. In portraits painted during her final years, Elizabeth is covered in jewels and gold, a living symbol of power. Yet, in each, her expression carries something unspoken, pride and sorrow entwined. The woman who ruled without equal had given her heart once, and never again. Legacy of two hearts. Robert Dudley was buried in the Beauchamp Chapel at Warwick, beneath a simple monument of marble and brass. Years later, when Elizabeth died in 1603, she was buried in Westminster Abbey, yet not far from her a sweet robin. On Dudley's tomb is inscribed a single Latin phrase. "His spirit is with the Lord, his body rests here." But in England's memory, they are never apart. Their story became legend, the tale of the queen who could rule the world, but could never claim the man she loved. The love that never wore a crown, yet shaped one of history's greatest reigns. Echoes through time. Centuries later, historians still debate their truth. Was Robert Dudley ambitious, or loyal? Was Elizabeth cold, or deeply afraid of losing control? Was Amy Robsart's death accident or murder, curse or coincidence? Perhaps it no longer matters. Because what remains is not the scandal, but the bond that survived it. In letters, in portraits, in fragments of poetry, their story endures. Not as a romance, but as a reflection of power and vulnerability entwined. Elizabeth once told her secretary, long after Robert's passing, I shall never have peace till I am with him. And maybe, in some quiet corner of eternity, the Queen and her Robin walk together again, free at last from crowns, from duty, from the watching eyes of history.